Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering 20,000 Patties Under the Sea and the Battle of Bikini Bottom. Okay, that second one, why do you have to be called that? Ever since 2007, people have been getting your name mixed up with Battle for Bikini Bottom, me included. Quite rude, honestly. But anyway, thinking of these two episodes together, I don't have much to say that would belong in an intro other than the titles of these episodes have a certain kind of dramatic flair to them. As always, I gotta say thank you to everyone watching today, love y'all, and now let's just get right into it. Starting things off for this review is 20,000 Patties Under the Sea. This is an episode that I don't see anyone talk about, ever. Okay, well, that's not quite true. This is an episode that I don't see anyone ever discuss the plot of, because all they do is talk about the two very famous jokes from these 11 minutes. Though I'm doubtful that most of the people who do talk about these jokes even know that they are from this episode specifically. If you're familiar enough with this episode, you probably know the jokes I'm talking about, but if not, don't worry, I'll discuss them when the time comes. But anyway, no matter what, I think my point about this episode lacking recognition still stands, and so I suppose that I'm about to single-handedly make up for this recognition, or this lack of recognition, given the length of this review. Yeah, I'll talk about that in the closing thoughts. Okay, so the first thing that I want to bring up is that this episode starts so weirdly. Already, the title card OST, Once Upon a Time, on its own brings a strange exploration vibe, and really, it's giving Spongehenge. And we all know what that episode's like. The uncanniness continues as the episode begins properly because for some reason the beginning shot of 20,000 Patties Under the Sea is a reused panoramic from jellyfishing. Why? No idea. Especially because it is so glaringly obvious. The footage reuse is kind of done poorly. The gorgeous shot that is clearly from season 1 abruptly cuts to SpongeBob's face as he and Patrick jellyfish, and it's super noticeable, and when watching I was very confused when it happened. Like, I thought I had gotten like a bad rip of the episode or something. I'm not really sure why this animation was reused, since the show doesn't even reuse animation not all that often, or when it does, it's not 5 seasons apart. Maybe they needed to fill some time, but both this episode and its sister are exactly 11 minutes long, and frequently episodes can be as short as 10 minutes and 45 seconds, so that explanation doesn't make that much sense either. And while I'm on this production topic, let me skip ahead to talking about the scene at the Krusty Krab real quick. Okay, so Mr. Krabs during this first scene of him, did anyone else think that he looked eerily similar to Green-Black Krabs from Fear of a Krabby Patty? Like, when I saw that, I had to do a double take, because I know Greenblatt left the show in season 4, so there was no way he boarded this episode. Maybe it's just me who sees the similarity. And then one more production thing I wanted to mention before moving on, but there was a floating cashier boat in one of the shots. I know I don't usually mention animation errors, even though that was something I used to be super into as a kid, but like, this one really confused me because SpongeBob SquarePants backgrounds are painted, right? Maybe they're painted in layers that are then moved around based on shot composition? That's the best explanation I can think of for this error, but I don't know anything about the process, so that's a guess at best. Alright, I'll move on to talking about the episode for real now. So this beginning segment of SpongeBob and Patrick jellyfishing is a mix of good and meh. The bit with Patrick not knowing he should say Roger was a lot funnier than I expected it to be, especially once Patrick confidently says Ringo. However, what isn't funny is the bit after that where SpongeBob is trying to get Patrick to help him and Patrick lacks all sense. Also, it doesn't make any sense to me because SpongeBob has never been shown to be uncomfortable around jellyfish before, so why is he freaking out? He literally has a net. So that all felt very off, and I don't like using this word, even forced. At the very least, it all ends with some fun slapstick, as well as even the jellyfish being like, what the F are those guys on? So that helps a bit. Also, I love how Patrick embodies that are we speaking French now meme? Luckily, we don't spend too much time in this middling comedic area, as the plot gets moving pretty quickly as SpongeBob and Patrick dig up the submarine. And that's all I can really say for the next minute or so, that the plot is moving, because nothing really funny happens in this section. SpongeBob and Patrick devolving into an argument is very abrupt and feels unnecessary, clearly only added as an explanation for why the submarine crashes into the Krusty Krab. I feel like they could have just done a simple SpongeBob can't drive joke, that would have been better. With the entry of the Krusty Krab into this episode comes an elevated entertainment factor. I don't think that Mr. Krabs and Squidward together is a dynamic that ever fails, or if it does, it's a rare thing. Once the submarine bursts into the Krusty Krab, we're suddenly thrown into a Mr. Krabs money-making scheme type of episode, and I don't have any complaints about that, because those are frequently entertaining as well. And as SpongeBob and Patrick leave to make Mr. Krabs some money, we get our first of the two famous jokes with SpongeBob's "Bye, Squidward!" And here we're about to enter a Pugs certified soapbox moment, so buckle up. So, part of me thinks this joke is hilarious. Like, the way Tom Kenny delivers it is fantastic. But the other part of me can't help but start thinking about the logic underpinning this joke. And, I'm realizing that more than likely there are some homophobic undertones in this joke, which isn't great. And let's be real, I'm probably right, because this episode aired in 2007, and as I've said in my That's No Lady review, we live in a deeply homophobic society. But that doesn't mean that this is a bad joke or anything, or one that I feel bad about finding funny. I just think that it's important to acknowledge that this joke was made with the logic that gay equals funny, which is a homophobic sentiment. I wish there was a way to get my point across without it feeling like I'm hating on the joke or something. Because I'm really not, though it's also fair if someone does hate on this joke, so don't even go there. But anyway, I just tell things like they are, and being a queer person myself, you bet your ass I'll be pointing things out when I see them. That's also why I'm so glad this show is with fish and not humans, because if I had to deal with implicit racism in the show, which yes, there are things I can say, but it's more about the behind the scenes than anything else, and even I tire of thinking of all the ways prejudice is baked into society because it's disheartening, I think I'd give up. Okay. That's my Pug certified soapbox moment. Let's get on with the show. We then get the entrance of Plankton into this episode, which I feel in general was kind of unnecessary. Okay, I think this episode would have been more fun if it was like shopping list and was about SpongeBob and Patrick going on adventures without the intervention of Plankton. But even though I do think that, Plankton definitely isn't bad here, so I'm cool with his presence. Not to mention, if we didn't have Plankton, we wouldn't have famous joke number 2, which definitely deserves its praise. This scene with the family is easily some of the funniest 30 seconds I've ever seen. Plankton's roasts are immaculate and brilliantly written and delivered. I want everyone involved in this to stand up and take a bow. I'm not sure who exactly came up with the joke, so I'll just credit Mr. Lawrence for delivery, and then Chris Riccardi, Aaron Springer, and Richard Purcell because they're all credited as writers for this episode. And moving on, I might as well just talk about the rest of Plankton's appearance in this one. I love how angry and desperate Plankton gets in this episode. His fury at continuing to lose is just so fun to watch. And I loved his little victory dance when he thinks he's won for once, which then leads to his demise. I'm also glad they stuck a split-second realization moment for Plankton in right before he hits the abyss wall, because that was a lot funnier than if he had just hit the wall while dancing. Plankton's arrogance bringing him down is done really well in this episode, as he could have easily won the sea monster over had he cooked his own patties instead of gloating and abandoning ship, but he didn't. And then of course, once he starts acting like a child, he becomes dessert for the sea monster. So he really lost here. It reminds me a lot of the ending of Fun, and it works well in this episode. Returning back to SpongeBob and Patrick's part of the episode, I enjoy watching them try to sell Krabby Patties in downtown Bikini Bottom. I especially love that we see the return of the con man from Chocolate with Nuts, and there even seems to be maybe a bit of continuity there as he says thanks again guys to SpongeBob and Patrick after they give him money to eat a Krabby Patty. I also think that this is a good moment to discuss how I love how SpongeBob lacks all care for money. He makes a great foil to Mr. Krabs. Mr. Krabs wants SpongeBob to sell Krabby Patties with the for money part being implied, and all SpongeBob hears is sell Krabby Patties. Doesn't matter who gets the money. And I just think that's hilarious. And I love the way SpongeBob and Patrick's and Plankton's paths keep crossing in this episode, with the first time being when the townspeople are throwing rocks at Plankton. I love the fortune that befalls our favorite duo as they manage to sell Patrick's burnt patties as rocks. Brilliant writing. It feels a lot like Krabs a la mode. Also, Jack M. Crazyfish is in that scene, so that's neat. Unfortunately, my entertainment dwindles as SpongeBob and Patrick fall into the abyss, as the build-up is too long and dull. Patrick misreading abyss is much less funny here than the way he misread west in ARG. Even the part where they are falling is just kind of meh. It's also sound overload with the alarm and the screaming, though I did kind of breathe out in a amused manner at SpongeBob being revealed to make siren noises. The sea monster was an enjoyable addition to the episode. Gene Simmons did a great job voicing them. Not funny on their own exactly, but amusing. And I like how apparently this guy has money even though they've been sleeping for 79 years in an abyss. Capitalism rules all. I also really like the moment where Patrick is talking about their hole being breached, and when SpongeBob's like, I don't know what that is, Patrick's like, me neither. When Patrick has those moments of smartness immediately followed by foolishness, that juxtaposition is usually pretty funny or amusing. As for the ending of this episode, SpongeBob's continual disregarding of money returns in a hilarious way as the duo use the money as a ballast, new vocab word strikes again, and it turns out they pull a Krusty Towers and bring back 37,000 pounds of decorative deep-sea rocks, which careen out the submarine with great comedic timing, especially that last one. Great closer to this episode. Mr. Krabs may be a protagonist, or at least not an antagonist, but seeing his plans foiled is oftentimes super funny because his reactions tend to be hysterical, especially when SpongeBob ends up winning anyway. I've been touching on this throughout this review, but I think the biggest strength of this episode is that we get to see SpongeBob persevere through difficult circumstances. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I love to see the little guy win, not only in his goals, but in the hearts of other people. Like, seeing him be a good businessman and everything turn out fine for him is just good for the soul. I don't know how to describe it. This episode also shows him thinking on his feet, which I thought was really fun to watch, and a good example of certain aspects of his character that can be ignored sometimes. SpongeBob is foolish, but not a complete idiot like Patrick. Sometimes I feel like that could be forgotten, especially in episodes where SpongeBob and Patrick pair up and act as a collective foil to another, typically smarter character. This review is appallingly long for no reason. Well, there is a reason, but I'll talk about it later, so let me just close it out now. I enjoyed watching 20,000 Patties Under the Sea. Aside from a few lulls, it's mostly funny and entertaining throughout. I do wish it had taken a slightly different direction, one that better fit the title of the episode, but in the end, I'd say it fits nicely at the higher end of my good tier, where it comes in with a score of 7.8 out of 10. Up next is the Battle of Bikini Bottom. Well, it's certainly not the video game, and I'm talking about plot-wise here. I haven't said anything about enjoyment factors yet, so don't think that way. The plot of the video game works best as a video game plot anyway, and the plot for this episode works best for an episode. So that's all I'll say on that specific comparison. The Battle of Bikini Bottom is an episode about SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship. Considering I keep bringing up sidebars about their friendship through my reviews of this season, surely that this episode is about exactly that means that I can finally get into some of my analysis of when depictions of their friendship work, right? Well, maybe? This episode doesn't quite lend itself to an easy analysis of that specific point, that I prefer when Patrick is a supportive friend, note that I am not saying good or helpful friend, rather than an unsupportive one. So I will actually be foregoing that analysis, but fear not, because this episode does lend itself to analyzing another related aspect of SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, when they have conflict, and when that works versus does not work. So you can look forward to that as I review this episode. The beginning scene of this episode is super cute and wholesome, and I love how the best friends' fun time shopping quickly falls apart as they take the shirts they're wearing too literally. I'm ashamed to say that when watching, I once again was expecting the joke to fall flat. Even as I try to fight it every step of the way, modern SpongeBob hate propaganda has sunk its claws deep within me. But as per usual, I keep being pleasantly surprised by how much I'm enjoying myself. The scene is dramatic but not irritating, and I'm chuckling when they get kicked out of the mall. And I like this as the setup for the episode, with SpongeBob and Patrick wanting to find some clothes that represent their best friendship. Once we move on to the loser battle reenactors, I love how Patrick completely just pulls out some bullshit about what the Battle of Bikini Bottom was. The story was pretty entertaining and funny too, and yet another good setup for what this episode is going to be. The concept of a battle being about being clean versus being dirty is just hilarious to me, and it is such a perfectly Patrick interpretation of what the battle could have been about. I also like that this is the perfect conflict for SpongeBob and Patrick. Shallow, but also serious enough to warrant a somewhat justified fight over. Much better than something like one of them being a jerk and a bad friend for no reason. And I'm definitely with SpongeBob here. Patrick is nasty. Wash your damn hands. Things continue to be pretty entertaining as the points of difference between SpongeBob and Patrick begin to show themselves. So one thing that this episode does pretty well is having fun visuals. I like the way cleanliness and dirtiness are portrayed here, and I love all the quick quips that SpongeBob and Patrick throw around, like with SpongeBob being like, you, me, and this can of disinfectant spray. And as their arguing escalates, I love how SpongeBob and Patrick just steal some people's clothes so they can look official for their upcoming battle. And as much as I hate the real-life equivalents of these fits, SpongeBob and Patrick are definitely rocking them here. Once the actual battle begins, we get lots of fun back and forth between SpongeBob and Patrick in the form of words, attacks, and gags of all kinds. These gags range from being simply amusing to being really hilarious, and it feels a lot like Employee of the Month, especially with Grass Skirt Chase playing. Except I kind of like these gags more than Employee of the Month. Kind of. With Employee of the Month, I liked how it utilized a montage so that we question how Squidward and SpongeBob got into all of these compromising positions, while in this episode we get to see these gags in their entirety. Anyway, I liked all the bits here during their battle in Jellyfish Fields, or at least that's where I'm assuming they are based on the grass. I think the part where SpongeBob lodges himself at Patrick with a toothbrush and toothpaste is hilarious because of the way he's smiling sadistically during the whole thing. Now that I think about it, this episode feels a lot like To Save a Squirrel too, with SpongeBob and Patrick getting increasingly unhinged. And the gags are accompanied with some great dramatics too, as SpongeBob and Patrick react to being the opposite state of what they want. Another standout from this scene is the booger bit. I love the live action stills used, and this is a design choice for the show that I've always loved, but I don't think I've mentioned before. They use these live action stills in moments sparingly, which makes it never lose its charm, just like the close-up paintings. We suddenly move to the Krusty Krab, which, pretending like I don't know the episode's plot here, I was not expecting, because, yeah, why the Krusty Krab? But hey, I'm not complaining. The only negative thing I can say is that the Krusty Krab's frequent appearance kind of highlights how missing characters like Sandy, Pearl, and Mrs. Puff are in this show, especially during these years, but that's a conversation for another time. The brief Mr. Krabs scene in this part of the episode was really funny, and it fully justified the use of the Krusty Krab for this final act. And the new location does lead to some more fun gags like the onions or the patties, so I can't really dislike it at all. Speaking of the patties, I love this part a lot. Patrick's shit-eating grin as he stomps around in the patties is great, and SpongeBob's reaction makes the whole thing hilarious. And this scene uses a track that I love, that is also rarely used, Hawaiian Party, so it's really just a win-win-win for me. And once SpongeBob reaches his breaking point, I love how he basically beats Patrick's ass. A good climax to all of this fun action we've been seeing. See, what's really nice about this episode is that although SpongeBob and Patrick are fighting for most of it, the fighting never feels that serious, so it's fun to watch. And as the fighting ends, once SpongeBob gets completely filthy and Patrick squeaky clean, and the two realize the other made them their own personal heaven, it feels really satisfying to see the two get along again and get something good out of their fight. I also love that SpongeBob basically roasts the battle reenactors with some thesaurus speaking, and it works. Yes, no more battle reenactments. It's loser behavior, what can I say? The last shot of the episode is also a lovely view of a Bikini Bottom sunset, closing the curtain on this great episode. The Battle of Bikini Bottom was a really enjoyable episode for me, and one I was pleasantly surprised by because I never remembered liking it so much, but I have now seen the light. There's no real low point to this episode because it's funny and enjoyable from start to finish. The plot of it is quite simple, and so the 11 minutes are largely spent like Employee of the Month, with a collection of gags. And these gags, although they have the same premises, they never get stale because they vary a lot. And like I said before, I love seeing a SpongeBob and Patrick friendship episode, especially one that does their friendship justice by showing that they are best friends for a reason, even when they disagree. All of this is why the episode is being put in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this review with some closing thoughts of mine. Okay, so, as you might have noticed, these reviews were pretty long. There is a reason for that. Back when I was doing the written reviews, starting with my coverage of 20,000 Patties Under the Sea, I wanted to bring back more analysis to the reviews, which had grown more recap-y over time. I mean, I still found the length of that review specifically to be a fluke, but that is the general reasoning as to why these reviews are a bit longer. For YouTube, I have been keeping up that analysis this whole time, but in these reviews there was just more of it. Another closing thought I had was something I spoke about in my original written review of the Battle of Bikini Bottom, but I decided it would fit better being discussed here. So I mentioned that I usually like SpongeBob and Patrick friendship episodes, and that's true. What I didn't go on to explain was that I think that usually depictions of SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship are at their worst when those depictions are in episodes that aren't necessarily focused on their bond, but on some other aspect of their dynamic. For example, Driven to Tears was more about SpongeBob's envy of Patrick, although that theme was undermined by Patrick being an asshole. Episodes that usually focus on the two's best friendship, like The Pink Purloiner, are usually pretty good, or at least decent. This isn't a hard rule or anything, as there are episodes focused on their friendship that end up depicting it horribly, but I'll get to those when I get to them. And with that last point said, I think it's about time to end the review for today, so I'll wrap things up here and I'll see you all in the next review.